In this section, we're going to be solving equations for x, and a lot of this stuff is going to be review, basically from the previous sections we've already done. So in this section, let's do a couple of different examples of equations and how we want to solve for x, and each equation is going to look a little bit differently, and we'll have different techniques for each one. So for the first one, just something like this: 2x minus 13 is equal to 4x plus 5. So whenever we want to solve for x, all that means is we want to get x on one side and then just a number on the other side. So the first thing we want to do here is, we see there's x's on both sides. So we could just choose one side to move all the x's to. We can move this 2x over to this side, that's okay, but we could also choose to move the 4x over to the other side. But in this way, let's just move the 2 over to the right. So we're going to subtract the 2x from the left, we're going to subtract the 2x from the right. So on the left, this cancels, and we're just going to be left with a minus 13. On the right, we're going to have the 4 minus the 2, so 2x, and we still have this plus 5. Okay, so now at least x is on one side, but there's also still this number 5 and this number 2 over here, so we need to move those over. So the first thing we can do is take this 5 and move it to the left. So we're going to subtract 5. And here we have minus 13 minus 5, which is going to be minus 18. And then just 2x, since this 5 and minus 5 cancel. And then the last thing we need to do is get this x alone. So there's a 2 here, so we're going to divide the 2 on both sides. And on the left, we have minus 18 divided by 2, which is minus 9. Here the 2's cancel, so we just have our x. And so we do all this work, and we see that x is going to be equal to minus 9. Okay, so an example to this one, it's similar but a little bit more complicated. 2x minus 7 plus 10 is equal to 3x minus 10, x minus 1. So whenever we have a problem that looks like this, the first thing we're going to want to do is get rid of all the parentheses. And the way we get rid of a parenthesis is just whatever the number is in front, we distribute it. So from this first one, we're going to distribute the 2. So the 2 goes to the x, that gives us 2x. The 2 goes to the minus 7, that gives us minus 14, plus 10. Then we have our 3x. Now this minus 10 goes to the x, and the minus 10 also goes to the minus 1, so we're going to get minus 10x. And minus 10 times minus 1, so plus 10. And now this problem just turned into pretty much the previous problem. We have some x's on one side, x's on the other side, and numbers. Basically the same thing as this, so all we have to do now is get x on one side and everything else on the other side. Before we do that, let's combine all the like terms on each side. So on the left hand side, we just have a 2x, but we have this minus 14 and this plus 10, so those two things can come together as a minus 4. Here we have a positive 3x minus a 10x, so we have minus 7x, and then just a plus 10. Okay, so now let's choose to move the x over to the left. So let's take the 7x and we'll add it to both sides. So over here we're going to have 2 plus a 7, so 9x. Still have the minus 4. The 7's cancel, and we just have our 10. Now what we can do is add this 4 over. So we have our 9x, the 4's cancel. 10 plus 4 is 14. And then the last thing we need to do is just take this 9, divide it over. And next is just going to be 14 over 9. And that's fine. There's no way to simplify this without a calculator. Okay, so on to the next examples. The next example, both of them we've sort of already done before. This next one's going to be review. And that's just solving an equation like this. So 3x squared minus 2x minus 1 is equal to 0. So we've solved this equation in the previous videos, and we did that by factoring. So we want to see first, so at all the examples that we've done when solving these types of equations, ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0, we've always been able to factor this, meaning we've always been able to turn this into, something like something, there's an x here, sometimes we had, plus a number, plus another number. we've always been able to turn this into something like this. Sometimes that's going to be possible and sometimes it's not. So when we're solving these equations, this is always the first step we want to do, see if we can factor it. So let's see if we can factor this one. And we remember that if there's not a 1 in front of the x squared, so how we have a 3, we have to use the AC method, meaning we have to take our a and our c, so 3 and minus 1, multiply them together, which gives us minus 3. And now we need to see if we can find numbers that multiply up to minus 3, but then add up to this middle number. But if we choose, say, minus 3 and positive 1, so minus 3 times positive 1, that is minus 3. And these numbers add up to this middle number. So in this situation, we are going to be able to factor. And then the next example, we won't be able to, and then we'll have to do another procedure to continue. Okay, so we have these numbers from the factoring. We remember that instead of writing a minus 2, now we're going to write a minus 3 plus 1. So we're going to rewrite this as 3x squared minus 3x plus x minus 1 is equal to 0. So again, instead of writing a minus 2 here, we're writing a minus 3 plus a 1. And then just like before, we're going to group these first bits together, these last two together, and then factor each of these separately. So from this first one, we see that there's a 3 in both of them and an x in both of them, so we could take out a 3x. So we're taking out this 3, we're taking out one of these x's, so there's going to be an x left over here. And we're taking this whole 3x out, so we need to put a 1 there. Again, so we multiply back through, 3x times x, that's 3x squared. 3x times minus 1, that's minus 3x, so that's good. And there's nothing to factor out here. We're just going to rewrite this as plus x minus 1. But now what we see is, well, there's an x minus 1 here and x minus 1 here, so we can factor that out. So we're going to take out our x minus 1. If we take out the x minus 1 from this first term, we're just left with this 3x. If we take out the x minus 1 from this term, remember there's just like a hidden 1 right here. So if we take out the x minus 1, we're just left with this 1. Equals 0. Then we set each of these pieces equal to 0. This one we just add the 1 over, we get x is equal to 1. This one we're going to subtract the 1 over and divide by the 3. So we'll get x is equal to minus 1 over 3. Okay, so that's it. We found the x values that if we plug them in, we get 0. So in this next example, it'll look similar. So the one we want to solve is so x squared minus 2x minus x is equal to 0. Sorry, this needs to be a 1. Okay, so x squared minus 2x minus 1 is equal to 0. So again, this is of the form ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Here in this situation, our a is 1. There's just a 1 in front of the x squared. So if we follow just our previous things, the way we've done this, we would try to factor this and solve it. So let's see if we can do that. So when we remember, if we want to factor and there's a 1 in front of the x squared, all we do is we start by writing 2 sets of parentheses, put an x here and x here. Now we want to look for the numbers that multiply up to minus 1, but then add up to minus 2. So let's just write this off to the side. What are all the numbers that multiply up to minus 1? Well, there's only one option. Here it's going to be minus 1 and plus 1. These are the only numbers that we multiply together to get up to minus 1. But you notice if we add these two numbers, we get 0. We don't get minus 2. So we're running into a problem. We're not going to be able to factor this. So this we can't factor. So whenever we're not able to factor, we want to use the quadratic formula. And so this formula right here that I'm going to write down, so quadratic formula. So in general, we're given an equation. Ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Whether we can factor it or not doesn't matter. Just if it looks like this equals to 0, then we know that x is going to equal negative b plus minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. So we have a formula for x. Technically, we never need a factor, but most of the time factoring is going to be much easier than using this formula. But if we ever have an equation set up like this, we have our a, our b, and our c. We can just plug each of those into this formula right here, and that's going to give us what x is. And so what this plus minus means is there's two answers. There's negative b plus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, and then negative b minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That's what this plus minus way. It's just a shorter way of writing this. So we're going to do negative b plus all that right here, and then negative b minus this. So this one. So to continue for this problem, we're going to want to use the quadratic formula now, because like we said before, we use the quadratic formula when we're not able to factor. So we can't factor this, so now we have to use the quadratic formula. So let's see, first of all, what is our a, our b, and our c? Well, our a is 1, our b is minus 2, and then our c is minus 1. So now what we're going to do is just plug this a, this b, and this c into this formula right here. We're going to simplify, and that's going to give us what x is going to be equal to. So negative b, negative 2, plus minus b squared. So we're doing negative 2 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, 4ac, so c is minus 1, then all over 2 times a. Okay, so we plugged in our a, b's, and c's. Now we just need to simplify this. So here we have a negative 2, so that's going to be a positive 2. Then negative 2 squared, which is just 4, minus, here we see we have 4 times 1 times minus 1. So again, minus 4 times 1 times minus 1, so that's going to be a positive 4. Again, because minus 4 times minus 1, that's positive 4. All right, and then the bottom is 2 times 1, that's 2. So let's simplify this a little bit more. Here we're going to have 2 plus minus the square root of 4 plus 4, which is 8, all over 2. And so say if we keep simplifying this, we need to simplify the square root of 8. So the way we can do that, where should we put this? So remember, when we want to simplify a square root, the way we can do that is we want to break 8 up into, we actually don't need the square root sign right now. So we want to break 8 up. So 8 can be written as 4 times 2, and then 4 can be written as 2 times 2. And that means when we take the square root of 8, so we look at all these little branches we made. We have a 2 at the bottom of each little branch. There's a 2 here, a 2 here, and a 2 here. When we're taking the square root, if we see 2 of the same thing, like here we see a 2 and a 2, we can just take one of those and bring it to the outside, and whatever is left at the bottom of the branches go back on the inside. Meaning, so here we have 3 2s. So we can just pair up these 2 right here, and this remaining 2 is going to stay on the inside. Meaning that this is then going to equal, let's put this over here, 2 plus minus. So instead of having, so this 8, this is 2 times 2 times 2. We're going to take these 2 2's, just bring one of them on the outside, and then so we're grouping these 2 together, and then all we're left with is this 1 2. So that stays on the inside, and that's divided by 2. And then the last thing to do to simplify this is we can, since we have a 2 here, a 2 here, and a 2 here, we can cross all those out. Actually, let's show those steps. Just expand this a little bit. So now what we can do is, so this is just a fraction. This is 2 plus minus this number divided by this. We can break this fraction up as 2 divided by 2 plus minus 2 root 2 divided by 2. So here, this 2 over 2, that just equals 1. So we have 1 plus minus. These 2's cancel, so we just have root 2. So this will be our answer. So again, just going over sort of what we just did. We wanted to solve this equation, but we tried factoring, we saw we couldn't factor. Then over here we look at, so if we can't factor, then we try the quadratic formula, which is always going to work no matter what, whether you can factor it or you can't factor it. We saw our a was 1, our b was -2, and our c was -1. So then what we do is just plug it into this formula right here. So we plugged in all the numbers. That was the step. So here's our b, 4ac all over 2a. So this outside, that just simplified to 2. This inside piece, -2 squared, that was +4. These last 3 turned into +4. Okay, so then we added these together and you get 8. And we still had this 2 here and this 2 here. And then we needed to simplify the square root of 8. And then if we remember how to simplify square roots, what we have to do is we take that number and break it up as much as we can. So like, 8 is 4 times 2, 4 is 2 times 2. And then whenever you see a pair, like here we have a pair of 2's, you can circle one pair and whatever's remaining goes back on the inside of the square root. So we have one pair of 2's, we take that 2 out. We have this 2 right here that has to go back on the inside. So this pair of 2, we just write one of them on the outside and this one goes back on the inside. So then we were left with just this. This square root of 8 got simplified into 2 square root of 2. But this whole thing is just a fraction. We have this plus minus this thing divided by 2. So we can break that up as 2 divided by 2, which is right here, and 2 root 2 divided by 2, which is right here. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Here, these 2's cancel, and we're just left with the square root of 2. And that gives us, so 1 plus minus the square root of 2 is our final answer. Okay. And the last problem from this section. So we want to solve a similar problem. So 2x squared plus 2x plus 1 is equal to 0. So if we try factoring this, again, we're going to see that it's not going to be possible. To see that, if we do want to factor this to solve, we see that there's not a 1 in front of the x squared here, which means we need to use the AC method. So here's our a, 2. Here's our c, 1. So you multiply those together, you're just going to get 2. And now you see we want all the numbers that multiply up to 2, but then add up to this middle number. But the only numbers that we can choose that multiply up to 2 are 1 and 2. And if we add these together, we get 3. So we're not going to be able to use the AC method to factor this. So that means we have to use the quadratic formula. So let's write that down again. So negative b plus minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. So now let's see, what is our a, b, and our c? Well, here's our a is 2. Here's our b is also 2. And here's our c is equal to 1. So now what we need to do is plug these numbers into this the quadratic formula. So we're going to get x is equal to negative b, so negative 2, plus minus the square root of b squared, so 2 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 2, c is 1, and all over 2 times a, so 2 times 2. Okay, so now we have x is equal to negative 2 plus minus, so 2 squared, that's 4. 4 times 2 is 8, so we're going to have minus 8. All over 2 times 2, so all over 4. And then keep going, so x is going to be minus 2 plus minus. Here we have 4 minus 8, which is minus 4, all over 4. But here we're going to be able to stop. So we said before that we can never have a negative inside of the square root. And that's what we have in this situation. We have a negative on the inside of the square root. Later on in this class, we'll be able to handle this a little bit differently. But for now, when we have a negative inside of the square root, we're just going to say no solution. Again, if you remember, because negative on the inside of the square root is undefined. We can only have positive numbers, so 0 or positive numbers on the inside. Here we have a negative. And so whenever we're doing these type of problems, we can run into this. For now, we're just going to say this is no solution. So yeah, for this one, we have no solution.